Welcome to Upfront in partnership with the Saskatoon StarPhoenix. I'm Simon Hyatt. In 2009, a plan was put in motion to build a new world-class art gallery in Saskatoon. Construction began in 2013, and now we are just days away from the grand opening of the Remai Modern. But the process hasn't always been a smooth one, and there's been a certain amount of controversy along the way. Joining me tonight to talk about the development of the gallery is City Councillor and Remai Modern board member Cynthia Block, and from the Saskatoon StarPhoenix, Phil Tank. Thank you both for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you back, Phil. We'll start maybe with you a little bit, if that's all right, and take a little bit of a historical perspective, because I know this is something you've been covering in a variety of ways for a number of years, because this is an issue that has been a part of the Saskatoon landscape, and with your purview as part of covering City Hall, part of things that you've been talking about for a number of years. So maybe let's go back and look a little bit at the Mendel Gallery itself, and of course the Mendel Art Gallery being shut down and making way for the Remai Modern. Let's go back and look at that, because this is a project that actually grew out of what was initially a plan to perhaps expand and renovate the Mendel, as I recall.
Yeah, I think it was about 2000 and early 2000s anyway, but, before my time, but I've certainly read a lot about it. The Mendel had really outgrown its facility. They were having to start turning down exhibitions because they didn't have the right environment in the building. They're having to turn down donations, if you can believe it, because they didn't have enough space to store the art. So they came up with a plan to expand the Mendel, and I think the original cost estimate of that was about $13 million, and that cost estimate grew as time went by. And I think it was like the mid-2000s when there was minority governments in Ottawa, and at the sticking point with getting money for the Mendel expansion was getting federal money nailed down. Mm-hmm. And then from that, there was controversy because they fired their director or told them they weren't going to extend his contract. And from that came, we're now planning to build a new gallery at River Landing. So that's a little bit of the history of where this came from. And then, of course, the council approved it in 2009. I think at the time it was supposed to start in 2011 and finish in 2014. And of course, it didn't get started until 2013, and now we're 4 years later. So it has been a long and expensive project.
And before we do dive more into the Remai, I do want to talk about the Mendel, and maybe Cynthia, because obviously you're well known not only for being a city councillor, but a long-time reporter, anchor in the city, as well as somebody who's lived in Saskatoon for an awfully long time. I'm guessing, going back, you probably have memories of going to the Mendel with your kids and whatnot, and also probably reporting there as well.
For sure. I think the Mendel holds a special place in many people's hearts. I did not grow up going to the Mendel, as many of you did, because I grew up in rural Saskatchewan. Sure. But my kids definitely were taken there for many of the types of programs that they had. I guess the one thing that, the nostalgia is there, but I'm grateful that as we move forward, we have this opportunity with the Children's Museum to maintain that piece of history. That architecture is pretty special to a lot of us, but in reality, our city has grown. It's doubled since the Mendel was built, and I think that we're on track, with a longer-term view, to ensure that same experience, hopefully an improved experience, will happen for our children's children.
Absolutely. The decision, though, initially to leave the Mendel wasn't necessarily a popular one. I know certainly the Mendel family spoke up against it. Phil, do you remember going back to those days, that reaction, both from the Mendel family and as well from residents? Because I think a lot of people were reluctant to see that building stop being a gallery.
Yeah, and I mean, there was a Save the Mendel campaign, and I think that continued on into even the 2012 election after they'd actually decided to build a new gallery. So it wasn't something, but I think people should keep in perspective that the Mendel, was not going to stay exactly as it had been. There was, the plan was to expand it. There had been conversations about admission fees during the whole conversation about expanding the Mendel. So, people can look at the Remai Modern and say, oh, it's so expensive and it's going to cost admission. But, it might have been the same thing with the Mendel Art Gallery as well. Definitely there's there's still affection for the building. I think City Council later this year is going to be voting on preserving it as a heritage building, or at least the exterior of it. So, I mean, the building itself promises to be there for a long time. And I'll just add quickly that I've been doing a little bit of historical research. The Mendel was controversial when it was built too.
Oh, really?
So that's worth looking at too. There was, I think I found that there was 3 other locations downtown that people said, one was near the Besborough, one was near the StarPhoenix, and there was a Save the Riverbank campaign, and that's partly why it wound up where it was.
Oh, that is interesting. I was going to lead into the next question with, well, this is something that's maybe factored into the last 3 civic elections, but clearly it's gone way back into Saskatoon's history, and I guess
I could add a little bit to that.
Absolutely. Jump on in, Cynthia.
TCU apparently had some challenges back in the day, and the research I've been able to find out that basically whenever you introduce such an icon, whether it's a big sports arena or a large cultural institution, that there is large pushback from a lot of folks. And I think you'll probably recall the days of the decision of where we were going to put our arena.
Yep.
And we ended up putting in the north end, and over time we all got used to that. But I'm not certain that was always the best decision.
Right.
And I think that the good news is that over time that has served our community extraordinarily well, and actually helps out city coffers because of how well that it's done. So the foresight back in the day to understand that capital investments are there for, they're not necessarily there to make us money,
Sure.
but they are there to serve the people. And the people want to be where those kinds of attractions are. And longer term, again, I think that this is going to serve us very well.
Absolutely. It's
If you don't mind me putting in a little bit of plug here, there's something scheduled to run on Friday. I did sort of look back at the Centennial Auditorium and the controversy, which was like 50 years ago, and how difficult it was to get that built, and how,
Looking forward to that.
And we might be talking about a downtown arena once again sometime soon, I suppose. But for now, we'll focus on the art gallery. It is interesting though when you bring it up, because there probably is always a controversy when you bring together seemingly maybe divergent worlds of the arts and commerce, and balancing tax dollars and that sort of thing, and trying to find a balance. And really, as I say, the last 3 elections, this has been kind of an issue, Phil.
Oh, absolutely. But, I mean, I do wonder sometimes whether and I've lived in quite a few different cities.
Sure.
I do wonder sometimes whether it seems to be tougher in Saskatoon. Like, we had 2 referendums on the arena back in the 80s, and yet we still built it at a place where I think most people would say today, gee, it hasn't really generated any of the economic activity that it was supposed to. There's not huge investment there compared to, say, I know it's a different story, but Edmonton's new arena, if you look at around there's buildings going up. It's sort of delivering everything it can be. And sometimes when you hold a referendum, I think this has been, I believe in direct democracy, but sometimes when you hold a referendum, people will vote against something else. Like, they won't like city council, or they won't like the last budget, and They'll say, here's a chance for me to vote, so I'm just going to vote against that. So again, Centennial Auditorium, Mendel Art Gallery, the arena. These sort of things can be tough. And we've seen when people start talking about arenas and the economic payoff and stuff. There's people out there who say, well, it's not really what they say it is. Like as Cynthia says, it's not necessarily just the economic payoff. It's like part of building a city.
Absolutely. Cynthia, you got to experience firsthand the last civic election in Ward 6, campaigning in the area where the gallery actually is going to be when it opens up this coming weekend. How much of an issue was it when you were talking to people? Were people asking you about the art gallery? Was this something that came up a lot as you were running for the first time in civic politics?
Okay, well, first of all, full disclosure, I'm a fan of the art gallery.
Right.
And I didn't grow up with that type of experience. I wasn't somebody that necessarily had an affection for the arts because I didn't understand it. And honestly, in many respects, I think you could say I'm not exactly an expert by any stretch.
Sure.
But I think I understand it more from the focus of how you build people and place so that people are attracted to it, and all of those economic spinoffs, as Phil was mentioning. But honestly, I did not hear a lot about it on the doors.
Interesting. Okay.
Ward 6 did not seem to see that as one of the top issues, and I think that our civic survey that we do every year, seemed to indicate that that people are pretty satisfied with how things are going. I think part of the problem with the gallery is that, I mean, people, change is hard, which we've talked about. Plus, there's layers of the onion that who's watching all of those details? Phil is. He's making sure. But I think that, when we started out on that venture and all of the cost-benefit opportunities between the Mendel and the Remai Modern, and to look, to the horizon about who we want to be as a community and what kinds of things we're going to need to attract more people here, at that time, at least, there was no additional money available from the federal government. We were able to leverage money from the provincial, federal government and from private donations to build that gallery for 30-some cents on the dollar. I don't think we would have had that opportunity had we stuck with the Mendel, and potentially never had that opportunity to become that special place for people to go that's unlike other places that you go to other cities.
Yeah, certainly when we talk about those dollars coming from other places, you'd probably be somewhat remiss if we didn't talk about the Remis and what they've done, both in terms of financial contribution as well as the, of course, the Picasso collection, the lithographs. I remember when that announcement was made. There's something kind of overwhelming about that when you think about that level of art, bringing that kind of art to Saskatoon. It's I think that's, whatever you may think about the dollars spent, that's pretty impressive that we're going to have those in our city.
And that's, I mean, you and I both probably have comments on that. But, I mean, the important thing to remember is this is a multi-purpose facility.
Right.
It is a world-class art museum, number one. But it has something for everyone. And for me personally, based on my background, I'm excited for that. I think that this environment, as beautiful and spectacular as it is, will be more welcoming to more people. It will have more opportunities for learning and engagement. The entire main level will be free to the public, including the learning and engagement area. There will be animation and art everywhere you go in the building, including in the area that is free to the public. So from that vantage point, I just think that we're moving in the right direction, and I'll let you pick up because I can't remember where I was going.
Well, yeah, I often feel sorry for Ellen Remai that she has her name on a gallery that is discussed with such controversy, because of course no one can really question her commitment. It's amazing. I think it's $15 million, or actually I think it's more like 17 million, because I think she came through with $2 million extra for the construction and finishing things, and then another $50 million for programs for I think $500,000 for. Is that 30 years? So yeah, it is an amazing thing, and I think I heard that it was either the biggest contribution to an art gallery in Canada or one of the biggest. I can't imagine that there'd be many bigger single contributions than that. So like I do feel a little, when people start criticizing, they're using that name.
I was going to say one other thing though about the Picassos is that I started out saying like what I love about it is that it's going to be a welcoming place for all people, but I think that over the long term, and to look at it more from a, who do we want to be, not just as a city, but for our downtown? What makes us different? What makes us unique? When you go to other cities, what do you look for? You go for you want to go where it's different, where it's, do they have Granville Island? Do they have, I don't know, the Vegas Strip? Or do they have the harbor in Toronto? Like, these are special places that other people have. We have this beautiful river landing with a world-class art museum, and the Picasso lino cuts, the largest collection of Picasso lino cuts in the world. Like, that's pretty spectacular to have that as a claim to fame. And I think over time, we will come to cherish that even more as a place of pride. For that reason, on top of the fact that I think that we're all going to have a great time there.
A lot to talk about with. Sorry, Phil, I'm going to put you on hold for just a second because we are going to take a break. Still a lot more to talk about, though, obviously. We will be back on Upfront in just a minute. Welcome back to Upfront. I'm Simon Hyatt, joined tonight by Phil Tank and Cynthia Block, and we are talking about the Remai Modern Art Gallery, which is opening up this weekend in Saskatoon. This weekend, as long as you're watching our live broadcast, that is. An exciting time, but it's been an interesting journey for sure, something we're talking about tonight. Phil, just before we went to break, I cut you off, but you wanted to talk a little bit, follow up on something Cynthia had said about how having this facility in our city will affect things.
Well, I remember seeing, I think I saw it on Twitter or Facebook this summer, someone saying, gee, I have a friend in town for the night, or, for a finite amount of time, what should they do? And they came back with all these suggestions. And I thought, in the future, it's probably going to be, if the one thing you have to do when you come to Saskatoon is go to the Remai Modern, because there's not always going to be a Blades game on. There's not always going to be, a brush game or something like that. And even if you go to Regina, they have a lovely new stadium, but there's not always a Riders game or a concert. So I think it will quickly become like the main attraction in Saskatoon. I can't see what else would compete with it. I think the question that lingers is how much residents will embrace it.
Sure.
Like how much, the Mendel averaged, I think, just over 170,000 during its last 5 years of operation, even though, and maybe that part of that was because people knew it was closing. But I think that's the question, is you see a lot of critics out there, and they've been, up until, say, about a month or two ago, they have been more vocal. Now I see a little bit more on social media with people saying, I can't wait for it to finally get open and people to see it and judge it for what it is, right, as opposed to how much money has been spent on it. And that's not important. Mm-hmm. It absolutely is, but I think people have to start, starting Saturday, they'll start judging it for, okay, this is what we have in our city now.
And of course, one of the things that will impact how many people come is the fact that they are going to be charging admission. I know there's hopefully a plan to maybe have some free nights over the course of the year. I think those details are still being ironed out, and maybe you can tell us a bit more about that, Cynthia. But let's talk a little bit about that admission, because I know this is something you had covered, Phil, the fact that at one time, I believe they were saying they didn't want to charge admission, and maybe that's something that has developed over the years, that it's maybe a necessity to charge admission to get into this new art gallery.
Well, I think they came up with two business plans, one in 2012 that was, they were adamant that there weren't going to be admission fees. They were going to charge fees twice a year for visiting exhibitions. And then they came up with another one in 2015 that said we are charging admission fees. And I think this is where the other gallery, or it's a city-run gallery, so you could sort of kind of share the blame around. But there should have been more of an effort to, public relations effort there to say, here's why we're charging admission. Here's why we think this gallery is going to be worth it. I mean, it's $12, so it's about what going to a movie would be and that sort of thing. But I think, people who were upset that their money was going into building this thing are now like, oh, it's also going to cost me to get in. Now, there are sponsorships and there are memberships you can buy to, I think, to get year-round access for less money. But so there's lots of other options there.
And I think that those other options are pretty impressive. I agree that communication is often the barrier
Sure.
for helping folks understand many things. And the decision to go forth with those user fees, I think, were very carefully thought out.
Mm-hmm.
I think I can say that the folks that I know that were around the table making those decisions back then, I knew many of them, very thoughtful, caring people, set out to figure out the best way forward to make a gallery that will have a good business plan, that will be something we can all be proud of, that over time won't cost, taxpayers extra money. And so I appreciate that. The other interesting thing is that I can't remember what the exact numbers were, because it depends if you're a student or a senior, but the average price, I think, is $50 or $60 for a year. So you'd only have to go there 4, 5, 6 times, and you've just more than made up for it. And there are 6 free weekends that are happening throughout the year that are sponsored. I won't say by whom, because it may be sort of considered a competitor.
Thank you for those.
Thank you for,
That's a television professional right here.
They haven't been very shy about it, though. Understandably.
Turn on the. Oh, never mind.
That's I mentioned off the top, you are on the board. Talk about that role, what it is the board does, and how you operate, because it is a board-run facility. Talk a little bit about that involvement yourself, Councillor Lowe, and several other people involved. Can you just give us an idea a bit about how that board operates?
Well, I've only been on for a little while, and sure. I'm really here to speak as one city councillor.
Sure.
So I don't speak on behalf of the board.
Absolutely.
I mean, I can just say generally that I feel pretty strongly that everybody that's involved in this project, whether on the board or as staff members, really, really wants it to succeed and do well. Mm-hmm. They want to fulfill that business plan, ambitious as it is. and they think thoughtfully and carefully about the decisions that need to be made. And they're volunteers, let's remember. The great majority of those people, well, they all are except for the two councillors, right?
Well, you volunteer in a way.
Thank you. But they're volunteers with high levels of expertise. I mean, you need accountants on a board
Sure.
to be able to do that well. You've got lawyers on that board, which are helpful to do that well. You've got people that have backgrounds, obviously, in the arts, and a whole host of others that are stepping forth from a large group of I guess, a broad framework of our community, including our Indigenous representation, and they have been, I think, a really big help to us over the last number of months as we managed that plan about what we were going to do for the opening. I mean, that's an operational decision, but I think it was very helpful to have a perspective from the Indigenous folks around the table.
For sure. It's a massive project, as everyone knows, a lot of work going into it. And I think maybe the scope of it in some ways led to one of the other frustrations that some people may have had. Just the fact that there were some delays along the way. You touched on it off top, Phil, but I think that's certainly something that people might have also had trouble with, the fact that we were thinking maybe it would be here a couple years earlier than before, but certainly there were several delays.
Yes, and I think I think we don't know entirely what the delays are. We don't even know what the final price is yet. I think that's still being what I've been told has been still being negotiated between the city and the contractor, Elliston. And I've read the city reports, and they refer to corrected drawings. And I'm not sure that I personally understand exactly what that means. Does that mean maybe the contractor's blaming it on the architect, or the architect's blaming it on the consultant or the contractor? Incidentally, I found something similar looking at Centennial Auditorium 50 years ago. So I think there's confusion about why it was. Usually you could sort of, and this is a very complex building. It really is. Elliston, the same contractor that's building the art gallery, built the new Civic Operations Center, which finished on time and I think under budget. So I mean, it's difficult for people to understand why they've waited so long. I don't think anyone thought that we would not be without a public gallery for as long as we've been since the Mendel closed in June of 2015 and the Remai Modern's opening this weekend.
Just like the small things that matter so much. If a pipe is in the wrong place, and then it can't be certified into the building, and suddenly any international exhibition won't come there. Or,
right.
I mean, there's complexities to that. I'm probably oversimplifying, but where everything is located, where the washrooms are located, where any water pipes are located, where any heating ducts are located, every tiny nuance of those drawings impact whether or not we can open the building to the grandness that it was designed to do. And it turns out that building an art gallery is a little complex.
Yeah, and especially one that's ambitious like this in terms of not just what it's going to house, but what it looks like and the statement that it makes on the river. It won an international award for its design, and as you say, it's not a giant cinder block building. It is a complex, interesting looking building. It's gotten some mixed reactions as well, which I would guess from the artistic perspective, that's probably what you want. If people aren't, yeah, exactly. If people are talking about it, which is good. It's a complex design, but certainly I think an interesting from an aesthetic perspective.
And if anyone's noticed lately, as the traffic bridge goes up, I go running in the area quite a bit, and you see the traffic bridge with the Remai Modern, and it actually all looks like it was designed together. It looks spectacular.
Yeah, it's impressive looking.
Well, I find it kind of interesting that the hotel and condo. I usually walk to work and back on the Broadway Bridge, so the hotel and condo that's going up next to it is kind of obscuring what I thought was one of the best views of the Remai Modern. But I mean, you still have, it's still going to be something that really stands out on the riverbank. You still see it. Definitely anyone driving on the Idlewild Bridge is going to, oh, what's that? Even if you've never heard of the art gallery before, you can see this bold building, you know.
And people will be getting their first chance to take a look at it this weekend with the opening ceremonies, October 21st on Saturday, starting, I believe, at 8:30 in the morning. And while judging from the initial response, and because it is a ticketed admission, the tickets were free, people snapped them up. It seems like, at least initially, people are pretty excited. Do you mind talking a little bit, Cynthia, about what this opening weekend is going to consist of and what people will be looking at?
Well, I think it's amazing that, you know, for everything we've been through to get here, we have an enormous waiting list. We're anticipated to put through 10,000 people this weekend alone. That's an enormous amount. And I mean, the fact that so many people want to go, I hope that you know, bodes well for maybe other sponsors stepping up and helping us out to have more free weekends. That's just a plug. I had to throw that in. But I can't say enough about how impressed I am by the world-class feel of it. For anybody who's been to another city and gone into any cultural institution, anything that any architectural building where you think, wow, this is a really special place, this one's second to none. Absolutely. And all the way through to the sweeping beauty when you walk in, to going up into the river room. And the Riverview room is where they will have like banquets and weddings and that sort of thing, and the spectacular view from there is really amazing. And you know, then you go up and you have the you know, the Picasso lino cuts, all of the exhibition areas. The exhibition area is huge, and of course the theme for this is field guide, and I think that, you know, that really speaks to our prairie roots and an ability to sort of you know, wander through and find our way as we move toward our own essence of who we want to be as part of the biggest cultural institution to open in North America this year.
I was also going to say that, you know, I think I think this is correct, that it's their restaurant is one of the few riverbank restaurants that you have a view like that of the river. And, you know, I know there's lots of people who find that frustrating in Saskatoon. You have, you know, this beautiful river going through, but you don't really have much commercial stuff alongside it. So, I mean, that's another addition the gallery's bringing.
Let me put in one more plug.
Do it. Why not?
So my background in communications.
We are getting a little short on time.
I know. I saw that. I've worked with tons of people that are involved in downtown businesses over the years, and so many times they wanted to talk about recruitment and retention and how much a cultural corridor matters to people that are moving to Saskatoon. So I'm hoping that will help support the business plan as well.
It was a bumpy ride to get to where we are with having the Remai Modern Gallery, but it does come to fruition this weekend, and we'll have to, I guess, wait and see what the long-lasting legacy is in terms of attendance and money spent. But for now, thank you both so much for joining us here on Upfront. Thanks to our guests, Cynthia Block and Phil Tank. I'm Simon Hite. Thanks to everyone at the StarPhoenix, and thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on Upfront.